just let it be. Let them be and allow them to figure it out. And I think that that's really hard for some of us who, like you said, we went through the process of school and someone telling us, what to learn and what grade you're supposed to be in. And if you are in second grade and you're good at second grade math, then you should be good at second grade reading, social studies, art, everything else. It should be as linear as possible. But as we are older, we see, hindsight, that is not always. I would even argue to say most of the time, that's not the way of like natural living. I don't think anything exists so methodically like that in life, like in nature, at least. Everything kind of moves in cycles and ebbs and flows.
You're listening to the Lifelong Learning Podcast with your hosts, Mama Kaiya and Mama Nika, from the Tribe Learning Co-op, an evolving village that supports families and finding their tribe through sharing resources and responsibilities. Journey with us as we explore what and how we learn with each other, our children, and ourselves. We and our guests will contribute to conversations around wellness through self-directed learning, parenting, sustainability, and community. If you've landed here, it's not a coincidence. What you're seeking is always seeking you too. We are so grateful for your presence energizing the tribe. Peace and welcome.
Good morning. This is the Tribe Learning Co-op, and I am your co-host, Nika. And with me, we have Mama Nika. And we're just coming to you today talking about back to school learning and the rhythms of homeschooling. So, Mama Nika, how you feeling this morning?
Good morning. I'm feeling tired because I had an evening to myself, and I normally go to bed very timely when I'm parenting all day. But since I wasn't, I stayed up to do all the things that I can never do. So definitely operating from a place of scarcity, but it was good. And now I'm paying for it.
I'm glad you were able to indulge in that self-time. It's so important.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was an indulgence. But sometimes you indulge and then you like paying for it later.
Mm-hmm.
I'm there.
Yeah,
How are you feeling?
Well, I'm a little bit tired, but I got my morning cup of Joe to kind of jumpstart my day. I had a late night as well. Just up talking to my hubby and waiting on our littlest member of the family to doze off. So, yeah, I'm a tad bit on the sleepy end of the spectrum, but give me about 30 minutes and I'll be great.
So is the life of motherhood.
Yeah. So let's jump right into this. I remember about 2 years ago when we first kind of started on the scene, the social media scene of, being a part of the tribe. We've been tribe for 4 years now. Woo-hoo. But we haven't always been as socially active. And so when we first got started, we started talking in the perspective of homeschooling specifically, right? That was like a very narrow focus.
Yes.
And I remember talking about some of the different learning styles of people, but obviously children as our primary age group. And when I was doing a little bit of research on some of the different learning styles, it really kind of blew my mind because the knowledge that I had was very basic. Either you're a visual learner or you learn by kinesthetics, by doing, or maybe you're an auditory learner. I never thought that there were more ways to learn, which the way that it registered in my mind was, oh, okay, if there's more ways to learn, there's more ways to teach. So in retrospect, I started kind of thinking about like, how do I learn? You know, how do I process information, and what is the best way for me to process information? And I'm reflecting on that. And I say reflecting because it changes the older I get.
Yeah.
But as I look back, I'm thinking about like how from the time that I can remember, how did I start learning and what was like the best way for me to learn? And then as I got older, into my teenage years, on up as a young adult, and I'm still claiming young adult. I'm only 32, so I would say
I'll be there for a while.
Yeah, I'll be there for a while. But, obviously, life experiences change how you learn as well, right? Life experiences, maturity, wisdom, all of these different like circumstances. So I just want to pose the question to you and take some time if you need. What was your first learning style as a child? What was something that just really like resonated with you whenever somebody taught you something or something? Because some of us as 90 babies, we learn through, oh, wait, you're an 80s baby.
80s baby.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Well, I'll just say millennials. That just encompasses us all, right?
Yeah, get us all in there.
Yeah, all right. So what was, as a millennial baby, a lot of us use television as a tool to learn. So like, what was one of the first learning styles that you can remember, either from someone or something?
That's a really good question. Up until now, I don't think that I ever really classified my learning styles. I know there were some times like maybe in high school, maybe even in like a college class where we would like take some little questionnaire. But like you said, I think it varies in a lot of categories. It's like not always 100%. Like you're not 100% auditory, that might be a dominant thing. But yeah, I'm thinking back even before being school aged. I have a lot of memories as like a child from like 3, 4. And I'm thinking, I don't even know if this is what do you call a learning style, actually. But I think my primary way, and I would even maybe say this is maybe all humans, was relating. Like I learned about things through being in relationship with them. So, before school, there's no agenda per se. Like I do remember learning like the alphabet and, the typical things that people kind of like run their kids through when they're, infants and toddlers. But outside of that, I feel like things that I learned were not very prescriptive yet. So I learned about things through relationship. And my primary relationship, other than to myself, was to my parent and guardian, my grandmother. And so whatever she was in relationship with or whatever she thought was like cool, I did too, because I was fucking with her. So if she was fucking with it, so was I. And I just remember like being really into like, I guess what people would call like care work or domestic work or something. I loved baby dolls. I loved caring for them, dressing them up, changing their diapers. I love play cooking. I love helping cooking. And I also really enjoyed taking whatever types of things we worked on. And she also gave me lots of opportunity to just kind of like self-direct. So if I was especially good at something, and I'm using good in air quotes, but if I showed interest and I was like very skilled in an area, she would always kind of supplement with like workbooks and things like that. I still like workbooks to this day. It's probably the most schoolish thing about me. I love me a good workbook and a worksheet.
I agree with you on that.
I know it doesn't always go neatly with like the whole self-directed, but I directed myself into some worksheets. So she would buy me, like take me. I remember going to the teacher store. I don't know if this was like all over the place, but in our neighborhood, there was a teacher store. It kind of had the vibe of, you know, those like child stores like Lakeshore and those types. But it was called the teacher store. And it was, I guess they figure only really teachers and people who were teaching were going to be interested. So it had a lot of resources for school teachers and parents. You can go and get all sorts of pencils and just craft things or whatever. But we used to be in there like weekly, my little self. And I remember just every time I got a pencil, and I was so happy and excited. And I would just look at everything and I'd be like, yes, I want this workbook. I want that workbook. And so I started this journey of like, I guess, solo study. I don't know what we call that learning style, but like where you just kind of want to be off on your own, just digging in deep.
Yeah. That one would be called solitary.
Yeah.
It's a very interpersonal learning style.
Yeah. Yes. Interpersonal for sure. So I moved very quickly from like my primary learning style being relating to things and people around me, primarily my caregiver. And she kind of like supported and guided me in directions that I was bringing myself. And that became like, okay, I'm about to just, you know, how people will just like veg out on a show. My ass was vegging out, finishing a full workbook. Like, can we go to the teacher store? Because I finished. She was like, okay. So she started getting multiple at a time. And there was just something about spending that quiet time, exploring, having to practice a lot of skills like reading instructions. I wasn't a fully reading person yet. I wasn't even 5. So I had to ask for help. So it was like, okay, I'm asking for help. I knew what instructions were. I was becoming familiar with the concept of like there being, you know, maybe like a correct and not correct way to do something, you know, things like that. So I kind of like got myself ready for school in a way. And it's so interesting to say that because that's very different from how I parent and support my children in their learning. Maybe it's because they didn't self-direct themselves into that direction, but that was totally me. Like as a child, I would have saw myself as like a philosopher, somebody who could just spend a lot of time alone, be with a subject and just like go deep into it. So yeah, I would say like a solitary learning style was my earliest memory, like even before school age.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm glad you were able to like think back that far. And I'm glad you talked about how like your primary learning style would have been like social, right? Like a very interpersonal, you're just learning based off of like the people that you're in relationship with. And if you were like under your grandma, you know, like she's the mother hen and you just love to be under her, then of course, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be the way. And I say that because one thing I did learn was like some learning styles, you know, are not even applicable yet, just based off of the child's age. So you were saying that this all occurred before the age of 5, from going from your primary learning style to, you know, a secondary version, which was very solitary. And it makes sense because like, if you're like 3, clearly, you know, you're going to want to be more social. They say that children they learn from each other. around those primary ages. And so that makes a whole lot of sense. Like, we wouldn't expect a 2-year-old to be like, to have a logical learning style. Like, yeah, that part of your brain isn't even all the way fully developed yet. So yeah, I can relate to that in a way.
You know what? Something that you just said made me think about like a social component of my, I guess, learning. Mm-hmm. My grandmother did used to like play school with me, a cousin that was living with us at the time, and another cousin that was living with us from another family. And because she knew that I was going to want to do some study, mm-hmm. and they were all around the same age, she tried to craft this little, schoolish experience for us. And I just remember they were not there, because they, like you said, they were young. And it's like to expect that they would be able to sit. Like, she had little mini desks for us and stuff. Like, my one cousin, he was wilding out because he's like, what? Like, I need to move around. He was 3. Mm-hmm. And then my other cousin, she was just like disinterested. Mm-hmm. She was like, I'll color, but I'm literally like, be quiet, pay attention. Like, I was in a different space, and I would say probably not even typical for my age range. And I just remember something that motivated me, even though I was like a solitary kind of learner. I got motivated from like their foolery. I'm just like, y'all can't focus, y'all can't act right. So I became motivated and maybe like internally competitive. And I remember that. So I feel like that's a social piece too, where you look around at your peers and, maybe there's a judgment of like, you all aren't doing something, therefore you're not going to get this lesson, or you're not going to understand or know this. And then me feeling like there's a value in knowing the stuff because I liked it. Then I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna show y'all, So there was like that social piece still involved in it. And you just reminded me of that.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up though, because I have a story similar to that. I have 3 younger siblings, so I'm the oldest. And I do believe that your position in, your family unit definitely affects how you move throughout life in general, but particularly in your family and maybe how you even learn. So I too would say that I was more of I had more of a social learning style, along with visual. Visual was just a really big one for me, which I think that might be the most common one out of like all of the learning styles. But the social component was kind of what you said. I was too motivated by like other people's lack or like their disinterest. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, well, I'm going to make sure I get it, and the teacher not going to say anything to me because I'm going to be, the best, or I'll be better. And although I don't know if that was like an internal, like just an internal processy in my mind, or if that was something that was like programmed into me. I do know, being the firstborn, the expectations and the stakes are high, and everybody fawns over you because you are the first in the family. So you get a lot of the attention. You're the newest member, and most people are going to praise you and even praise you for things that you may not even have accomplished yet. So I know that there was some programming there, but once my siblings came along, particularly the twins that are right underneath me, I took on more of a leadership role, when it came down to the family unit. So not only did I learn a specific way, but I also was teaching a specific way. And I looked at it as it was my duty to teach them. Mm. And I would also get really upset if they did not take it seriously. It would be like, they don't want to learn and I don't understand why. And Like, you got to learn this so you can be smart. And that was like my interpretation of like socially learning and passing on information.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this one particular time where I had a little whiteboard on one side and it was a chalkboard on the other side. And I had 2 little chairs and I had my siblings sit in them and I had to bribe them to come sit in the chairs. I had the whiteboard up and I was writing on it. So I had to be probably like 5 or 6 and they had to be like 3 or 4. And I was writing and I was like, okay, you got to pull out your books and turn to this page. I had it all set up in my head and they were just really playing in my world. I was the teacher, they were the students. And of course, it makes sense because I'm the oldest and I know more information. So I want you guys to know. Here you go. And they were just kind of like, this is boring. I don't want to do this. And I was so frustrated. And I told my granny, I was like, Granny, they don't want to sit down and learn. And then she was just like, well, Kaiya, you know, they don't have to. They don't have to sit there and that's not how they want to play. And I was just like, but they need to be smart. And I could tell she had a lot of compassion for like what I was experiencing because she was just like, I know you care about your brother and sister. You know, if they want to sit down and learn from you, they can, but you know, you got to give them choices. And so I think that experience of me being born as the first child and learning visually, maybe even my astrological sign being a Leo, natural born leader, I am compelled to, you know, learn socially and teach in that way. And obviously when you regurgitate information, that's also a part of like learning and retaining information. So I'd agree. I would think socially, social visual. And I would say like my worst way to learn was like verbal. I'm like, don't tell me nothing. Okay? I'm not going to remember it. Write it down because I could read at an early age. So it was easy for me. Just write it down and I'll read it and I can do it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I kind of reflect on that, it kind of makes me think about my own parenting and how like we tend to tell our kids things, you know, because it's just the easiest way to express information. You just open your mouth and start talking.
Yeah.
But what if your child doesn't learn in that way? You know, what if that is like the worst way for them to learn? You might start experiencing more quote unquote behavior problems or backslides or just rebellion. And I feel like I experience that all the time. So maybe it has more to do with how I'm teaching than it has to do with how, you know, she learns.
Yeah. And, you know, they say like children don't listen to what you say. They watch what you do.
Oh, baby. Yes.
And I think people in general, you know, even as adults, we're not necessarily maybe intentionally looking at each other with the goal of learning something from each other, but we do learn from each other. And what we learn most from each other is who we are, you know? Mm-hmm. So, you know, we all have that person or those people in our life that like talk a talk, but don't walk the walk. And I feel like we can recognize that dissonance because I think we are more, we're quicker to watch and like observe because like, I guess visual learning is what you're calling it. Is like, it's way more than simply just looking, you know, like to truly observe and witness and like take something in visually, you are doing a lot of processing. And I feel like that's way more full than just like hearing somebody say something, because now you're trying to see like, is there any dissonance between what I just heard and what I just witnessed? Because I believe these eyes. So, right. Yeah. Wow. Oh, yes.
Yeah. I like going back to what you were saying earlier about like college, right? So I went to college as well. And I think about like some of the classes that I really enjoyed. And they were always the classes that like had PowerPoint presentations, like it was some type of presentation, a video, sometimes using charts or graphs, and having study groups.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that, I'm probably still like a visual, social learner. But I'd like to add in that the older I get, the more that I appreciate like a solitary learning style. And I think that's because I don't get much solitary time to just, explore. Being a parent and always having little ones on you, it kind of, I'm just not in that stage in my life. I'll say that. Yeah. It's just, a lot of my time is taken up. But has your learning style changed as you've gotten older?
Oh, for sure. I think so much of how I learned, like you said, was kind of steeped in the way that I was programmed or conditioned, mm-hmm. maybe not fully intentionally, but somewhat, being like the first grandchild who was a daughter, or a girl, and just like all of the energy that was put into me, for a lot of different reasons. Like, mm-hmm. because of that, being quote unquote pretty, mm-hmm. and cute, and then having like a personality that was kind of meek and agreeable, and then people feeling like, oh, that's a good child, mm-hmm. And then like having all of that recycled and reproduced for me, and me like learning a sense of self that was essentially, the birth of the good girl, mm-hmm. that we all know about, and many of us are taught to prescribe to. And I'll say the luckiest of us bust out of that earlier. Oh my goodness. When people talk about like the girl who was like just wild or whatever in middle mm-hmm. school or high school, I'd be like, go you. Okay. Just go you. Like maybe your pendulum had to swing quick because you wasn't with the shit, mm-hmm. and you wanted to balance it out before you went to college or before you became a mother. But anywho, I think that really kind of set the stage for the ways that I learned and that I preferred to learn, because my goal for so long wasn't really like being authentically connected to what I was learning. Mm-hmm. It was like perfecting, or excelling and being the best, Yeah. I was very much that child where in every class, I think if I didn't have like a likable personality, mm-hmm. people would have hated me, because they're just like, this is your class, this is your show. You got all the answers. But I learned very early, like, let me step back and, not seem too smart, or let me not say too many of the answers, because I want to give other kids a chance. So I'm like managing all of that as like a 7-year-old. Mm-hmm. And also what's wrapped up in that in a schoolish environment is a lot of praise. So getting a lot of praise or a lot of feedback that like, you're doing great, or, you're superior. I think all of that kind of supported the ways that I learned, which were just based on mastery. Mm. It really wasn't about truly learning something, because there were sometimes like when I got older that I was just doing it to get the 100%. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't really absorbing it if I didn't have an interest. So when I was younger, I was naturally inclined, like if I'm talking about my true authentic interest, I was naturally inclined towards like math and science and things that kind of revolved around logic. Mm-hmm. And I think it was because it seemed a little more right, wrong. You know, it was very clear for me.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you know, things that are open to interpretation, like historical events. History wasn't my jam. Social studies or whatever. Even like language and, you know, I don't know what it was called back then, but like language arts and all of that. It was like, I could read. What else do we need? You know what I mean? Like, what else do I really need to be focusing on this for? Like, I don't care about subject and predicate. It's just, so I was more so like, let me just learn what this is so that I can just do it and get my 100% and move on, because I really wasn't interested in learning and understanding for real. It was just the minimums to have mastery or to appear to have mastery. Yeah. So I imagine there were tons of children who maybe authentically did enjoy studying the English language in this way, who their scores or the way that they performed in school might have looked like they weren't as interested or didn't have as much mastery as me. But because I, from an early age, learned to, like, my learning style was essentially crafted out of this desire to be right all the time. And, you know, it's a completely long, winding conversation around like what that actually means and how it relates to safety and all of that. But because that's how I learned, I would say as I got older, I started preferring learning whatever learning style that was going to get me to mastery, because I start detaching from whatever it was that I was learning, unless it was like math. That was kind of like my only like pure interest. And I think it was because it was less about like language and words and things. And it was very linear and straightforward. And so this whole like mastery type of learning style, I don't even know what to call this. Cause I'm like, damn, was I really learning? I mean, I guess I was like just kind of moving through. I skipped the 4th grade. Every year they were like, she's playing in these classes, so we just need to move her up. My grandmother was really concerned because she didn't want to like jump my social development. So she always declined that. But then finally, when I was in 3rd grade, she complied and I went to 5th grade after that. And then I just like continue forth. I would end up going to a high school that was just like, I just never studied. It was easy. It was just like, I'm just here. I'm literally here. I'm like getting 100%, 110%, like bonus and extra credit. And I remember it was just like, this is just what it is. Like, I can't even really tell you what I learned in high school because I wasn't there. I wasn't there. I was just performing it. Like, I was literally on hella teams, clubs, having after school practice. I had a whole job working 25 hours. And I'm like, and I had like a boyfriend all the time. So I'm like spending all my time caking up. I'm just like, how? I don't know how I could do that today in this body. Like, that sounds like a lot. 25 hours a week. What? On top of everything else I got going. I don't know how I was able to do it. And I think it was because school, while I did have to spend a lot of hours there, really wasn't like a mental or, you know, time investment outside of that. So the outside of school time was purely all of my time. And so I don't know what to call that kind of a learning style, because I'm questioning if what I was learning. I wasn't learning the content. I was learning to be masterful or the best. I was learning to excel. That's what I was learning this whole time. So maybe that's social learning in a way. But when I went to college, I finally landed on what it really requires for me to be invested. I was a pre-med concentration, so very science, math heavy, which was very, you know, that made sense for my interest at the time. But it wasn't those classes I really liked. I learned a lot, I enjoyed it, but it was my anatomy and physiology class that really took it to the next level for me. I was so interested because it had to do with the body. And I've always been very in tune with learning about the body and its rhythms, which is one of the first, things that I kind of voluntarily presented to my children, versus oh, let's learn how to read. I'm let's learn about this body that you in that's carrying you around. So I feel like that was a lot of visual.
Yeah.
A lot of visual, just looking at the body and the systems, the organs. And it was a lot of auditory because it was college. So it was lecture, long ass lecture every day. I had the class 5 days a week. And so I started to realize that what I really needed to be truly invested in learning was not only my own authentic interest, but having somebody talk about it. And I feel like that is probably more than visual for me. If some of the things that I've learned in my life, literally I've had no pictures, no slides. It's just been about making a connection with the person that's communicating and truly deeply listening to what's being said and visualizing or creating a mental picture. And I remember a class that I had that was an elective, and it was my first and only Black professor that I had at that school. And we were talking about urban youth. So it just felt so relatable, especially at this predominantly white institution, that we're talking about stuff that, is just off of the news, for a lot of my peers. But for me, I'm just oh no, this is lived experience. I felt really connected to the teacher. And then I felt really connected to the content because I felt like I had some lived experience of some of the things. And so it felt just relevant, as opposed to, sometimes we learn things in school where it's just why am I learning this? What does we have to do? What am I going to, do with this? But this was more an interrogation of systems. So providing me with language for things that I already knew about and experienced and had my own understanding. But it was providing language and conceptualizing things in systems that helped me talk about this in a way that maybe somebody else could have even just a glimmer of an understanding. So I realized oh, it's about how somebody talks about something, which I feel I talk so much, I think is because that's how I learn best. So I think that when I'm trying to communicate to somebody that's how they learn best. But I've gotten feedback that's not true, but just, context for it. So I think now, even as an older person, auditory, yeah, that's probably my primary way. And then just doing it, the experiential, physical piece of just let me be real kinesthetic about this. And I'm going to do it and embody it. And therefore I'll learn it. But then also when I do stuff, I tend to listen to things, music, podcasts, because I'm oh yeah, I'm learning with my body, with my literal muscles and muscle memory, and practicing my remembering these pathways in my brain, but also taking in information. That's one of my primary ways of learning now that I'm much older.
Hey, that's what's up. So it sounds like it just changed a little bit for you because you found something that authentically resonated with your interests, and then you just tailored that to the easiest way to get the information because you already had the interest, I like that. And I can agree with that. When I was in college, I felt like I had kind of a little bit of culture shock. I wasn't all the way prepared. So like, yeah, I had the motivation to learn a lot, but my goal wasn't always mastery. I think my goal was more so a validation, to be seen, to be recognized for, my good work, or for conforming. I have a lot of those themes in my life. And so that's probably where the social piece comes in. But now that I'm older, it doesn't really matter to me as much about like conforming and showing or proving that I know something, or that I have some type of like expertise over a situation or over a concept, and just more so about like, how can I get the information and what benefits does it have to me or those that I care about that are directly around me. So yeah, there's a lot of themes that came up in that. And like you said earlier, like getting down to the root of it is a whole nother conversation based off of how you were like socialized or programmed, or how your parents or guardians just interacted with you and what their desires were and motives were, indirectly or directly.
Right.
I was watching a video last night. The title was, how you can teach yourself anything. And so this person described herself as an autodidactic, and how she just like taught herself based off of what she was interested in. And she taught herself many different things. And that kind of like made me think a lot about like self-directed learners. And I know that's a big theme over there with you all. And so her story was like, she started out teaching herself how to paint, just watercolor paint and paint with oils. And she was just breaking down like how she was like looking at the image and how she could take whatever it is that she was trying to reflect back on paper, and how she can actually reflect it on paper, like based off of where the shadows were in the image, or the contrast between the light, the different levels of light and everything, and just how it broke down in her mind. And her motivation, though, was she didn't, she grew up very strict, I guess. That's the way that she described it, in a strict household. So there wasn't much room to figure out like what she enjoyed or desired. She just kind of had to like go along and do what was necessary. But as she became a young adult, she learned how to like direct herself based off her interests, and how that kind of steamrolled her into other things and learning other skills. So her example was she was looking at an image on her computer, on her laptop specifically, and the image was what she was trying to copy and paint. And so she'd get up every day and she'd just do a little bit and learn a little bit, make mistakes. But then something happened with her computer. It fried. It was dead. And she was just like, now I got to buy a new computer. But instead of her buying one, she decided to build one. Probably because, I know, right? I was like, okay, you are pretty ambitious. But probably because, maybe she didn't enjoy the processor inside the laptop, or maybe it didn't have enough memory. But, since she gave herself the freedom to observe and to figure out like what worked for her as she was learning this other skill, totally unrelated to computers, it just kind of like rolled her into, okay, I could just buy the pieces and I could put it together in the way that benefits me most. And she said that it took time. It took months. But when she got it, she had the computer that she enjoyed and that worked for her for what she needed it for. And she was just kind of talking about how you can like teach yourself pretty much anything. And that kind of just sat on me a little bit. I'm always thinking about like my children first. I still have that self-sacrificing mom mentality at times. Even if I don't act on it, it still comes to the forefront of my mind. And I think about like the best ways for them to learn. And, you all have a nice influence over, how I move with my kids, specifically because we aren't self-directed learners over here. That's a new muscle to move with our household. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought about it like, wow, what if I gave my kids the freedom to just like learn off of their own interests? How far would that take them? And what does that look like? And more specifically, what it doesn't look like, Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't look like someone telling you how to or what to think, right? It's more so of you making mistakes and learning from your mistakes and moving forward from there. And I think that is like, that's going to be a really good stretch for me in particular. I have to kind of get out of their way in order for them to kind of pick up in that way and stretch my own level of faith that they will be fine. They will be fine and they'll figure it out just like you did, because as I reflect back, I noticed that, I didn't always go off of what everybody told me to do. Mm-hmm. I considered it and I still made my own decisions anyway. So,
right.
Like it just makes me think like, okay, I need to observe what their learning styles are. And they are still young, 5 and 1, right? My oldest will be 6 in a couple of weeks. Well, next week, actually. And just thinking about it, like, all right, what are the learning styles that are presented? What's working, what's not working? And that's based off of the communication, the feedback that I'm getting, AKA the meltdowns, the rebellion, the back talk, all of that. And what's the best environment? So is it self-directed? Is it more, group oriented? What does the group look like? Is it home-based? Is it more institutional or facility-based? And how different that learning style would look in those different settings. And so, what do you think? I know that was like a lot, but.
No, but it was everything though, because like when you started talking just about like your own process of coming into interests, and similarly with me, like coming into our own interests, we have that motivation to learn and to explore and learn a new skill, like you made some sourdough bread, you know what I mean? Because you wanted to do that, and learning to sew and all of these things. And while those might have some social, cultural components, that is a desire. So you put forth the energy, the research, and whatever else, bought the tools, and I relate that to the story with the artist who built the computer. And it's like, the thing that I love about stories like that is it really gives us permission to not be boxed in. And what I was saying earlier about like the learning styles is, I think all of us learn in all those ways. We might primarily learn in one of them at a certain time in life, but as we grow and evolve and our circumstances change and our interests and desires change, then the way that we primarily learn will change too. And that all of that put together to me is self-directed. So if there was an ultimate learning style, I would say it's self-directed. And to a degree, I think pretty much most, if not all, people fit into that. If we kind of peel back the layers of even some of the ways that people do things that, seem more customary, like, okay, go to school, then you go get a job and, you do the things that you're told. In a way, I would argue that's still self-directed because you made the choice.
Yeah.
Now, the question is always, are your choices rooted in your desire? Because if it's rooted in your desire, 100%, that's self-directed. So no matter if you're at home, no matter if you doing it in a group, doing it solo, if you go to a school for a year or two, or for the rest of your, life, if you desire that, that's self-directed, because it's not just one way. Like how homeschool, that happens at home. It might happen in a co-op or at somebody else's home, but that's homeschool. You're not going to go to so-and-so prep to homeschool. You're not going to do that. Whereas self-directed means you can go anywhere that your desires take you. You could go to Europe or Africa or Australia to learn something, because that's where your desires take you. But I do think that the thing that, differentiates like true self-directed learning versus, I'll say more compulsory type learning is like that desire piece. Yeah. Because if we observe children, like they really do naturally move in the direction of their desire. And so I would say they're self-directed from the start, but then some of the more compulsory things kind of kick in. And because we are so like schooled in our thinking, we automatically bring that into their orbit before they even go to school. Like that's how, like widespread that system and that institution is. We automatically start teaching them things that are going to prepare them for school, which begs a question that I always ask is, what are we preparing our children for? Because when you sit and reflect on that, if you don't really think that you're preparing them for a school, like say if you're a homeschooler or free schooler or whatever, and you're not as concerned with like matriculation through the grades, getting straight A's, going to college at 18, getting this career that you can work for 20 plus years. If that's not your tract and that's not what you're preparing your children for, I would even question, then why do we do some of the compulsory stuff when they're young? Because that doesn't really apply to them. But if you are preparing them for that, then it makes sense. And so I think at every interval, asking that question of, what is my role in somebody's learning journey? I would like to say I could be a facilitator of some sort. I could be a support person, but I'm not really the teacher. So I don't really stand in the role of teacher for my children or for any children, because I feel like you can, just like your example, you can teach yourself anything as long as it's rooted in your desire. And it sounds like in that example, she desired another computer. So she did the labor involved in learning to build a computer. That sounds like, way over my head. And I'm like, I don't know if I desire computers that much. I just be out here like offline looking at a tree, because I'm like, I don't know. But also I haven't been in that position where, what if that was my only option? And I think that is the other piece that is related to self-directed is desire, because maybe she did have like the funds, or her parents had the funds to buy the computer, but she genuinely wanted to build it. But let's say in the case that she didn't have the funds and this was the only option, I feel like when we learn things like new skills and information that is relevant to our life, we're more inclined to do it. So, if you live in the middle of the USA, fishing just might not be the skill that you just naturally learn and is passed down in your family. But if you live in like towards the Gulf, or you live in on one of the coasts, perhaps it is, because that relates to your environment, that relates to like your ecosystem and your diet, and then obviously culture. But that might be a thing you can choose to do if you desire, if you are more inland. But the reality is it might not be as relevant to your life. Maybe there's something else. Maybe there's bison or something that you learn to hunt. And maybe you don't learn that skill if you live on an island. You might be more inclined to say, okay, what's more relevant to my lifestyle? So I think relevance and desire are like two key things that support me in like, claiming what people call self-directed, which, I mean, it's just another word, just like all the other labels and things. But the way that I experience it is very much like does this make sense for my life? So like if my life is, if I'm thinking of as a child, if I'm not going to school, why do I need to master this by 5? Why do I need to learn how to read by, in pre-K before I go to kindergarten? Or why do I need even transferable skills? I would not dare say that something was a waste.
Right.
Might have been not the best use of money. But I don't think that if people were equipped with the practice of being rooted in desire and checking in to see if something was truly relevant, if we were in practice with that, many of us would not have chosen the paths that we chose, because we realized I probably didn't even need to do that. And doing that didn't necessarily equate to the outcome that I thought.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm appreciative of this conversation, because I would agree with that. I don't know if she's a woman now, but like, yeah, you can teach yourself anything. Do you desire it? And does it make sense for your life? Because if you're stranded on the island, you're probably going to learn how to fish. If you can't afford a computer, but you need it, you probably going to learn how to build it because it's relevant to your life. So yeah, I really love that story and that example.
Yeah, it was definitely a good one. I was just thinking about like how you were talking about being a self-directed learner and having like the 2 components of desire, and what would you classify it as? Like opportunity or need, maybe? Would that be
I think I was saying like relevance to your life.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to a common theme in our conversations of like allowing children to find ways to trust themselves, allowing them to build their own intuition. So instead of us depositing all the time, just let it be, let them be, and allow them to figure it out. And I think that that's really hard for some of us who, like you said, we went through the process of school and someone telling us, what to learn and what grade you're supposed to be in. And if you are in 2nd grade and you're good at 2nd grade math, then you should be good at 2nd grade reading, social studies, art, everything else. It should be as linear as possible. But as we are older, we see, hindsight, that is not always. I would even argue to say most of the time, that's not the way of like natural living. I don't think anything exists so methodically like that in life, like in nature, at least. Everything kind of moves in cycles and ebbs and flows. And so like taking the information that we know now and trying to apply it to the way that we parent, it all goes back to intuition, allowing the child to exercise that intuition muscle of what is it that I like? I need to figure that out first. And the beautiful thing about children are they're so pure, they naturally just gravitate towards what they like. We just got to get out the way and sit back and watch.
Yeah.
And
that
then,
part.
Sit back and watch, right? Yeah. Which is hard. It's hard. I mean, no one said it was going to be easy, but it's definitely hard. I think like maybe the more children you have, the easier it gets because your vitality just naturally kind of decreases.
Maybe that's why our 4 mothers were having 16 plus kids, because you like, look, y'all are going to figure this out. I believe in you. You breathing. You know how to wipe butt. I believe in you.
I believe in you. Yeah. And you know what? The funny thing is another component of learning, in my opinion, is stress. There are healthy ways of stress, like healthy stressors. So it makes me think about like when I hear certain people or just different people, and obviously this is a continuum, but if I want to make it as clear as possible, let's just use a very binary way to look at this. You have some people that are very much so like their parents supported them in a lot of different ways, almost to where they are kind of enabled and they don't have the skills to like direct themselves.
Yeah.
So they pick up the phone. Mom, how do you do this? Or I need my taxes done. Or I got a letter from, the city saying this. What does that mean? And maybe that's just because of the environment that they grew up in. And I'm sure the intention from the parents was good. Like, I'm going to support you. Right.
Right.
But then on the other side, you have some people whose parents were, maybe they worked a lot, or maybe they come from a philosophy of like, you got to get it out the mud like I had to. And that's going to make you stronger. And in a way, it does kind of make them stronger because it kind of forces them, right? It puts that need back on them and it forces them to learn something that they otherwise would not have learned if that stress wasn't present. Or maybe they would have learned it differently, or maybe they would have learned it later on in life. But having the stress of, like, for instance, us being latchkey kids, right? I don't hear about too many people nowadays, training their children to be latchkey kids. And
right.
For those of you who are listening and you might not know what that is, a latchkey kid is a kid who is young, I guess, I would say maybe under 10, and whose parents or a parent, guardian are working. They can't be home at specific hours to allow the kid entrance into the home. So the kid has their own set of keys and they are responsible. They're given the responsibility of either exiting the home or entering the home at a specific time and not opening the door for anybody else, right? That presents a certain skill that is useful. It helps with maturity. It helps with being responsible. It helps with safety awareness. It helps with learning how to feed yourself, cook for yourself, clean up after yourself, direct your own focus on your work so that your work can be done by the time your parents get home. Maybe even meal prepping, such as take out the chicken, let the chicken unthaw in the fridge. I think we all kind of remember that. I didn't have so many phone calls from my mom. Like, hey, I need you to take the chicken out the fridge. All right, make sure your homework is done. Make sure that your little brother and your sister are doing their homework. I want the chores done before you get home. It gives a certain level of responsibility. And that is a stressor, right? It might be a good stress, or it might be a bad stress, depending on how you interpret it. But that level of stress, it does something to your brain, and it motivates you in a different way than if you were a kid who had all that support, that cushiony support to explore other things. You might not have had to worry about feeding yourself or even learning how to cook, because if your mom stayed at home and the other parent was out working all the time, then you didn't have to, that wasn't a part of your everyday life.
Right.
So those are just some things that I think about, and how I would say in my experience, I'd like my kids to have a certain level of stress. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure of how I want that to look, because life is very different right now for me. They don't have to be latchkey kids because I'm home all the time. And I'm not sure of how they would learn those lessons that I learned at a young age. And if it's even relevant, right? Back to that relevance, if it's even relevant to them, for them to learn it at the age that I learned it.
Right. Yeah. I think staying centered on, is this relevant, is so important, because how many of us are teaching our kids stuff that we learned because we find value in it, but we lived a whole different life than them? And how many of our parents did the same thing because they were able to take some value from the experience they had. And so therefore they feel like you also need to walk 4 miles to school and 2 miles to fetch a pail of water, because that taught me fill in the blank, responsibility and blah, blah, blah. And it's just there's more than one way to learn responsibility. There's more than one way to learn about, self-sustenance. And I think that is our work. And you said something key that I wanted to add on, which is, sometimes we need to get out of their way. But more importantly, I find as being the guide and the facilitator is we need to get out of our own way because they already come in ready to self-direct. We have been conditioned to not. So we have to get out of our own way in order to get out of their way. So oftentimes, which is why I feel like, when I started being a little more, I'll say active in some of the tribe things when I moved, I'm just like, okay, well, I can't just come chit chat in the kitchen and, we just be vibing and the kids play and sometimes they learn or whatever. It's like, okay, how really can I show up? And I realized a lot of what was shifting for me was less about the children and what they're going to be doing and learning and more about me as a parent, as a human that needs to get out their way as a necessary step to then go back in and observe what they're doing, how their desires are bringing them to what they want to learn, how it's relevant to their life. So then I could facilitate and support that. Because if I don't get out of my own way first, then I'm going to be trying to govern that shit. Oh, you like this? Okay, well, let me teach you about this. And it's that's really counterintuitive to the whole idea of what it means to allow them to self-direct. And it's not going to be this schoolish concept where people can go drop their kids off at the Waldorf school, but then go home and act non-Waldorf or non-Montessori or, your kid gets to do this stuff at this place that you've invested in, but then back in your house, oh, this school is so great. They serve plant-based meals and they stretch and they do yoga and they do all these great things. Great. And you invest in it because you want those experiences for your children. But then they come home and you're eating McDonald's and ain't nobody lift a finger to stretch because that's not really the lifestyle. I guarantee with self-directed learning, that ain't going to work. There's no way that you can support a child with self-directing if you're not also in that practice. And that is a big difference between being what, is called schoolish. I got that from Akilah Richards. That schoolish mindset that I can outsource something and then I don't have to be about it in my own home because that's somebody else's work to do. Being self-directed and being in true relationship with the young people in your life requires that you're going to have to be connected to them and constantly relating. That then is going to let you know, when it's time for whatever it is, whatever needs to emerge or whatever needs to be learned. We don't have to depend solely on what we did to become responsible or, what the job force is looking for. Because, we were prepared for the job force because our parents and grandparents were.
Yeah.
But if they would have had the foresight to just let that slide, we could have been the generation that's underneath us who just getting rich off of a TikTok. You know what I mean? Right. So, because what are they doing? They're literally doing what they like to do. You like to tell jokes. You like to shake ass. Whatever you like to do. And you're getting that's monetized. So now you don't have to spend all of these hours worrying about how you're going to eat, how you're going to save for if you want to go to college, if you want to buy a house. All you're doing is on your device. And we demonize these devices and things for children, including myself. I really don't like my kids having a lot of screen time, but I have to wrestle with myself and really get out of my own way and recognize that they are not us.
Right.
They are growing up in a whole world where people are, whether we agree with it or not, unless we about to go to, the rainforest or the jungle and just be done. Which is maybe an option for some folks. But if we're not doing that and we're going to be here, we're going to be paying taxes and doing all of this other capitalist shit, equip the child to know how to use the device.
Right.
That to me, that's relevant. And that's me having to get out of my way because, I grew up and I was on road trips and I didn't have a tablet or I didn't have this and I didn't have this. And I know why I'm saying that. And I'm saying that because I'm I want you to look out the window and observe this mountain. Look at these cows. But that's about me. Because if they're not in that environment and they don't have the tablet, they come right back online. Okay, I'm observing. So it's not like they're breaking down just by learning this set of skills that's truly relevant for their lifestyle. Like I didn't even have access to the internet until I was like, maybe like 8 or something. And it was like AOL dial up. And it was like a 50-50 chance if it was going to work. It was like, is it going to work today? Yes. And so I'm just like, yeah, I have to get out of my own way, because we will know what's relevant by just getting out the way and recognizing what it is that they might need for this world that they're evolving into. We don't have any idea outside of like sci-fi movies and conspiracy theories, really what it's going to be like when we're 60. We don't really know.
Right.
But these children, they're going to be almost middle age, and they're going to be operating in a whole different paradigm. It's some elders right now who don't even know how to operate an email address. Everything we do, you need an email address for every account, every app, so I have to like contextualize that whenever I'm getting off on this like proverbial soapbox of like what kids today need to do. I don't know. I don't know. And I think that's a part of being self-directed too, being able to own that you don't know and you won't know. Yeah. And it's not up to you to know, because the value is not in knowing. The value is in the experiencing and getting to know. Yeah. Because the way we get to know is going to be unique. It's going to be rooted in our desire, and it's going to be based off of relevance for our life. And so I just really like appreciate being able to talk about this, because I do think in the context of learning style, when I think about like natural learning style, if there ever was like a way to just kind of talk about it, like from birth, it's like self-directed. When babies come out, even so many of the families that I've worked with, they struggle, like maybe because of like the history and the stigma around breastfeeding. People already presume like that there's going to be an issue. And it tends to be around if they're going to produce enough milk and if the baby can latch. Those are like 2 primary things that people get really stuck on. And then I'm like always questioning like, well, where is this coming from? Because you might have this fear because you're not like connected to your own body, because you weren't taught to know what happens and how milk is made. But the baby doesn't have that fear, because the baby comes already being like ready to self-direct into the next thing. The baby supported in being born because they knew their needs come out. And now the baby know they need to eat. Like they're just going to crawl up and they're going to try. You can facilitate and support, but it's going to be up to that baby. And sometimes they're like, oh, well, it's been hours and they haven't latched on. And I'm like, this is a critical step in parenting. I know it's scary, but are you going to allow for your child to figure something out? They're going to figure out that they're hungry, and they're going to figure out that if I don't do this uncomfortable work and cry a few times and get my mouth open wide enough to latch onto this nipple, then they won't survive. And so we already come in with that programming of like, it's relevant for me to know how to breastfeed because my survival depends on it. And there's that little bit of stress that you're talking about. That stress propels them. And then if you get in the way, with all of your thoughts and, opinions about, oh, well, he's crying, I don't want him to struggle. Let me just give him this bottle. Then it's like you're taking away this golden opportunity for like, I guess, setting the groundwork for a self-directed person. Yeah. Because they will be fine. Like biology is amazing. The baby is born with enough brown fat on their body to survive for a couple of days. You're good. Like biology got you, evolution got you. You take that couple of days to get out your own way so that you can allow for this, for the genetic code to come online, so that it can reactivate, because then you start seeing, people talk about these new kids, and I'm just like, yeah, because a lot of them are starting to be born in a more liberated way. Like their parents are giving spaciousness for them to come in more liberated ways. People are reclaiming breastfeeding, all of these like things that support humans in their early development in being self-directed. So of course, we're about to see a lot of people kind of come up and like reclaim these ways. Just like, this is our natural way. This is our natural learning style. A little bit of stress to bring us into the direction of like, this is relevant for my survival and for my thriving. And then, you operate from desire from there. And I feel like our primary desire for most of us is like to thrive. That's a baseline, to feel good. Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah. Most people would say, our primary baseline is to survive. But I like that you said thrive, because thrive adds in the equation of pleasure and feeling good. So not just having a roof over your head and food and water and, and clothing, but also to have love and to have pleasure. So we naturally seek that as well. And I think that, I'm really glad that you reflected on how like self-directed learning is already embedded into our genetic code. We come out of the womb with that in our DNA, in our brains. And, although there are variances, right? Because everybody's born differently. But I think the self-directed learning is a part of the desire. It's a part of the desire and it's a part of the relevance, right? So it kind of just encompasses all of that. And as you said, we have to sometimes get out of our own way first, because then we're able to allow the child to gain their information that they need to live in the world that is theirs, not ours. So I think that that's, there's so much that we could talk about with that, but I'm really glad that we started with self-directed learning. And so it'll be good to like have a part 2. Maybe we could talk about some of these learning styles in a more facility environment, and then maybe in a more homeschool environment, and what that may look like, for those who subscribe to those ways of, to those environments of learning, right? So one thing that we could take away from here is whether you subscribe to homeschooling or sending your children to school, there is always a benefit and an advantage to being a self-directed learner. You can provide that right at home just by sitting back and being a people watcher. You as the parent, you people watch the little people and you just see how they do. See how they do in the time that you have to spend with them, and allow them to make the mistakes that they need, because it is a part of their journey. It is actually necessary, right? They have the relevance, and that's to survive and to thrive. And then they also have it grows their intuition to prepare them for the next world, right? So thank you for that.
Yes, this was a great conversation. And I agree. I even wrote down on my little notepad, like some different part 2 themes. So I'm like, that's its own episode. Yeah. This is perfect. If you guys are hearing this and you're hearing it before September 6th, I'd love to, invite you all to join us for a more in-depth conversation with other self-directed learners and other folks who just are diving into this whole learning journey, whether it's for themselves or for their children, or and no matter the environment, we'll have a nice variety of people to kind of talk to and get their experiences based off of their culture and their needs, their relevance to learning information. So I'd like to invite you guys to our tribe chat, The Rhythms of Homeschool, September 6th at 7 p.m. And the link will be in the show notes. Thank you guys for checking in and joining us on this beautiful Sunday morning. And I will see you all on another episode. Until next time, peace.
Peace.